I've always been a quiet kind of neighbor, the type who waves but doesn't pry, who takes pride in trimming his own hedges, and who values a morning coffee more than a committee meeting. The lake was the main reason I bought this house in the first place. Tucked behind the rows of beige suburban boxes and identical mailboxes was something raw, untouched. A stretch of clear water cradled by weeping willows and cattails, with mist rising off its surface like breath in the early hours. It wasn't a private lake, technically, but it wasn't fully public either. The access path ran between two parcels of land, one of which was supposedly HOA controlled, but no one had ever enforced anything. For years, people treated it like common ground. Some fished. Some brought folding chairs and books. Kids splashed in the shallows in summer. I didn't mind the occasional noise as long as it wasn't rowdy. Mostly, I loved that I could step outside, walk a few minutes down that path and lose myself in silence. That lake saved me in more ways than one. After my wife passed, I'd go down there just to breathe. When the world felt like it was caving, the lake was steady. I taught my daughter to skip stones on its surface. She said the ripples reminded her of time travel, like sending messages into the future. Even when she left for college, I'd walk the path at dusk, thermos in hand, and sit on the same sun-bleached rock we always used. I didn't go to HOA meetings, not because I had a problem with the HOA. I just didn't care to be involved in neighborhood drama. If people wanted to argue about mailbox paint or lawn lengths, that was their business. I preferred solitude over squabbling. Live rocked and let live, you know. I paid my dues, kept to myself, and stayed out of their way. Every now and then, though, I'd get a strange vibe, like the time Eleanor, the HOA vice president, was walking by and saw me loading my fishing pole into the back of my truck. "Back from the lake?" she asked, all smiles and plastic politeness. I nodded. "Got a few bluegill, tossed 'em back, though." She tilted her head slightly, smile still stuck in place. "You know, not everyone appreciates trespassing." The comment hung there like a bad smell. I chuckled awkwardly, trying to brush it off. Didn't know I was trespassing, just using the path like always. "Oh, I'm sure you didn't," she said, tapping her clipboard and walking away, like she hadn't just stabbed me with something disguised as sweet. I didn't think much of it at the time. Just HOA people being HOA people. Maybe she had a stick up her ass about boundaries. Maybe she didn't like me fishing. Either way, I let it go. That was the last peaceful morning I had at that lake for a long, long time. The morning it happened felt like any other. The air was cool, laced with dew, and the sky was painted that soft cotton candy pink you only get right before sunrise. I poured my coffee into a thermos, slung a light jacket over my shoulder, and started my usual walk down to the lake. The gravel crunched beneath my boots, birds chirped in the distance. It was supposed to be just another quiet moment before the day began. But as I rounded the familiar curve past the oak tree with the twisted branch, I stopped cold. There it was. A fence, tall, black, and ugly, an iron monstrosity stretching across the entire path to the lake like some kind of medieval gate. At the center, a locked gate with a shiny silver padlock, and nailed right to the middle of it was a sign in all caps, HOA property, authorized access only. I just stood there for a moment, blinking like maybe I hadn't had enough coffee yet and this was some weird early morning hallucination. But no, it was real. The path, the one I had walked 100 times, was now sealed off like a crime scene. I walked up to the fence and tugged at the gate. Solid. Not even a hint of give. I looked around. No workers, no warning tape, no cones. Just a finished fence, clean and polished, like it had been built under cover of night. No notice, no email, no vote, nothing. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA number listed in the quarterly newsletter. After 3 transfers and a 10-minute hold, I finally got someone. Marcy, the HOA president. "Hi," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "This is Dan from Cypress Drive. Just went down to the lake this morning and saw there's a fence up across the access path." A pause. Then her voice, sweet and syrupy. Yes, we've installed a protective barrier for liability reasons. There have been some concerns. Concerns? About what? Unsupervised use of HOA property, potential damage to the ecosystem. It's all in the best interest of the community. There was no notice, no vote. That path's been open to residents for years. Well, unfortunately, not everyone respects shared spaces. It's time we enforce the rules. Click. Just like that. Neighbors started noticing over the next few days. A few were annoyed. Some muttered under their breath, but most, they shrugged. Too busy, too tired, too numb to care. But I wasn't. Every time I looked at that fence, something twisted in my gut. It wasn't just metal and bolts, it was a message. One I wasn't willing to ignore, not after everything that lake had meant to me. Not after the way they dismissed it like it was just a patch of grass and a line in a rule book. They thought they could wall it off and I'd disappear. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I've always believed in picking your battles. But the fence, that wasn't just a battle. It was a damn declaration of war. And the more I looked at it, the more it itched at me. Something about it didn't sit right. No announcement, no vote, no permits visible anywhere. Just poof, a 10-foot wall standing between me and the place I'd come to think of as my personal sanctuary. So I started asking questions. At first I kept it casual. Few emails, a polite phone call. Hey, just wondering when this was approved. Most of the replies I got were vague, if I got any at all. It was in the last meeting minutes, one board member claimed. It wasn't. I checked. I read. Through every dry, overworded paragraph of the last 6 months' worth of minutes, and found nothing about a fence. That's when I got serious. I dug into public records, started snooping through county land maps, zoning applications, easements, anything I could get my hands on, and that's when I found it. The path to the lake, the exact patch of land they built the fence on, wasn't actually owned by the HOA. It was a weird little sliver of land, long and narrow like someone had drawn it with a shaky hand on the plat map. According to county records, it was still owned by a man named Richard Dobson. And here's the kicker. The HOA had been leasing that land for decades. The lease had expired earlier in the year and was only recently renewed. Temporarily, they didn't own it. They just had borrowed it. And it wasn't even a long-term lease, just a 6-month agreement renewed with vague terms. That was my opening. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to confront the board directly. I showed up to the next HOA meeting, clipboard in hand, records printed out. It was held in the local library's multi-purpose room, rows of plastic chairs, a long folding table where the board sat like some kind of suburban tribunal. When I brought up the lease, Eleanor, the smug vice president, barely blinked. Oh, we're well aware of our agreement with Mr. Dobson, she said, lips pursed so tight they might snap. Everything we've done is entirely within our rights, but it's temporary, I said. You don't own it, and you certainly didn't have the authority to put up a permanent fence and restrict access without notifying residents. She smiled, the kind of smile you'd expect from a snake basking in the sun. Some people need boundaries, Mr. Carver. That's how she always said my name, like it had a stink to it. I glanced at the rest of the board, but none of them would. Meet my eyes. They sat there like bored judges, tapping pens and pretending to read the agenda. I appealed again. I reminded them of how important the lake was to the community, how it had always been shared. I even offered to help maintain the path if that was their concern. But they weren't interested in compromise. This wasn't about liability or the environment. It was about control. Eleanor made that crystal clear when the meeting ended. As people were filing out, she walked by me and leaned in. This isn't personal, she said almost sweetly. But you should understand. You can't just use things because you feel entitled to them. There are rules for a reason. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled, because now I had something they didn't know I had. The truth about that land. And something told me Mr. Dobson might be a whole lot more reasonable than this pack of petty tyrants. Let them play their little power games. Had just found the lever to tip the board. I found Mr. Dobson on a Tuesday morning, after a couple hours of digging through county records and a few calls to the local property assessor's office. The man had owned that odd, narrow strip of land since the early 90s, picked it up at a tax auction for next to nothing. According to the file, he lived just 2 towns over in a modest ranch-style home at the edge of a cul-de-sac. Figured he probably didn't even remember the property existed. I was right. When I knocked on his door, he answered in a flannel shirt and slippers, with a half-eaten apple in his hand and a dog barking somewhere behind him. "Can I help you?" he asked, not unfriendly, just cautious. I introduced myself, explained that I lived in the Cypress Lake community, and mentioned the sliver of land he still owned, the one the HOA had recently built a fence on. He squinted, thought for a second. "You mean that little nothing lot by the water?" I nodded. "That's the one. You still own it, sir." He chuckled. "Huh. I haven't thought about that place in years. Bought it back when I was scooping. Tax lots thinking I'd flip 'em one day. Never got around to it. So the HOA fenced it off? Without your permission, as far as I can tell. They renewed a short-term lease but built what looks like a permanent structure. That got his attention." He leaned on the doorframe. "They told me they were just going to put up some signs. Said it was about keeping kids safe or something. Offered me a few $100 for another lease. Said they were protecting nature." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not what they're doing? They locked the whole community out of lake access, no warning, just cut everyone off." He shook his head. "Sounds about right." I took a breath and made my move. "Mr. Dobson, I'd like to make you an offer. I'm not looking to flip it or develop it. I just want to restore public access. Respectfully, quietly. I'm prepared to purchase it outright. Clean sale, no games." He looked at me for a long second like he was measuring whether I was serious. Then he gave a slow, satisfied nod. "Name your price." It wasn't much. We had the paperwork drawn up within the week, and I brought in a local attorney, just to make sure everything was buttoned up tight. A clean transfer. No lines, no entanglements. By the end of the month, the land was mine. The only legal access point to Cypress Lake now belonged to me. And the best part? The HOA had fenced themselves out. They didn't own the land they'd built on. They just assumed they could strong-arm their way into control. I didn't remove the fence. Not yet. I just changed the lock, swapped their padlock out for mine, and posted a brand new sign on the gate. Private property. Access by written permission only. I didn't say anything. No mass emails. No dramatic declarations. I just waited. It didn't take long for the fallout to start. I could see Eleanor from my porch the next morning, pacing in front of the gate, hands on hips, trying her key in the lock and finding nothing but resistance. She jiggled it, yanked on it, even tried calling someone on her phone. I just sipped my coffee and smiled. Let them stew. Let them wonder what happened. Because now I wasn't just a homeowner. I was the gatekeeper. I didn't take the fence down. That would have been too easy. Instead, I changed the lock, swapped out their shiny HOA-issued padlock with a matte black one of my own, high-grade and bolt-cutter resistant. Then I laminated a sign, just the right size to catch the eye but not scream desperation. I bolted it to the gate right where their old sign had been. Private property. Entry by written permission only. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I also slid a neatly folded letter into the HOA Dropbox. Attention to the board. CC'd to the property manager and legal liaison. In plain professional language, it stated, effective immediately. All access through parcel 48C, commonly used as the lake entry path, is hereby revoked. The parcel is privately owned and no longer under HOA lease. Unauthorized entry will be considered trespassing under state statute. It was signed, notarized, and delivered with a level of petty formality I found absolutely delicious. The next morning, the storm hit. Eleanor showed up around 7:45 a.m., clipboard in hand, espresso in the other, flanked by 2 other board members, who looked more confused than concerned. I watched from my porch, coffee steaming in my mug, as she rattled the gate, then fumbled with her key, and found the lock wouldn't budge. Her face was priceless. First confusion, then irritation. Then the dawning horror that control had slipped from her manicured fingers. I walked down to the shoreline behind my house and pushed my kayak out onto the water. By the time I was paddling lazily across the lake, Eleanor was back at the gate, phone to her ear, barking into it like she was summoning troops. I gave her a friendly wave, a slow, exaggerated one. The kind of wave you give when you're absolutely unequivocally winning. She didn't wave back. Instead, she called me. "Dan," she snapped, the moment I picked up. "What do you think you're doing?" "Good morning, Eleanor," I said cheerfully. "Just enjoying a paddle. Lovely morning. You had no right to lock that gate." "Actually, I do. I own the land now, and the fence, that's technically an encroachment. But I figured I'd leave it, for aesthetics. You'll be hearing from our lawyer." "Already heard from mine. He's better." Silence, then a venomous, "You're being unbelievably petty." "No," I said, smiling. "I'm playing by the rules, just like you taught me." Click. Over the next week, I watched them scramble. They tried to find another way down to the lake, some side path, some back route, but there wasn't one. The lake's edge was surrounded by dense woods and private property. The only feasible access point was mine, and now it was locked tighter than Eleanor's upper lip. They discussed building a new path at the next HOA meeting. I attended just to watch the show. "Well," Eleanor huffed, projecting confidence she clearly didn't feel, "we'll simply develop a new access road. The lake is a community resource." One of the newer board members raised an eyebrow. "That'd take years, and a construction permit, and we'd need to purchase land that's not in the budget." The crowd murmured. A few homeowners raised their hands and started asking why they weren't informed about the original fence. Others grumbled about not being able to fish or bring their grandkids to the water anymore. One guy flat out asked, "Why can Dan still get in?" I sipped my coffee and didn't say a word. In the following days, I received a few half-hearted attempts at diplomacy. A flyer asking for community volunteers to brainstorm lake access options. A polite email from a board member asking if I'd be willing to discuss a mutually beneficial agreement. I let that one sit in my inbox for a week. Then I replied, "At this time, I am not offering public access." The HOA's previous handling of this matter demonstrated a lack of transparency and good faith. However, individual permission may be granted on a case-by-case basis. Feel free to inquire directly. Within days, my inbox was flooded, not with board emails, but with messages from residents, parents, retirees, fishing enthusiasts, people who missed the lake and had no idea what had really happened. I started granting access, quietly, privately, just folks I trusted. I'd hand them a temporary code or meet them by the gate to let them in. No fuss, no HOA involvement. Meanwhile, the board fumed, Eleanor especially. One afternoon, I paddled to the middle of the lake and laid back in my kayak, sun on my face. I heard the chain-link gate rattle again and looked back. There she was. Eleanor, arms crossed, glaring at me like she could will the water to boil. I lifted my hand and gave her a big, lazy wave. God, it felt good. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Word had spread about the locked gate, the revoked access, the mysterious landowner who'd shut it all down. Residents who had never cared about HOA politics were now burning with questions and grievances and a shared, rising fury. I showed up 15 minutes early and still had to lean against the back wall. The place was packed. Every seat was taken, some folks standing in the hallway. I recognized most of them, retirees with fishing poles, moms with toddlers who used to skip stones by the lake, that quiet guy down the block who always flew a drone over the water. Eleanor was already at the head table, flanked by the rest of the board. Her face was tight, lips pursed, eyes scanning the crowd like she was prepping for war. The meeting opened with the usual script, but the room practically vibrated with tension, and then it started. First, a man in a Veterans for Peace ball cap stood up. Why was the lake access fenced off without a vote? A chorus of "yeah" and "answer that" echoed around him. Eleanor cleared her throat, clearly flustered. The board acted in the best interest of the community. There were safety concerns, environmental erosion. Another resident cut her off. Don't lie. You locked us out. You didn't ask, you just took it. Someone else held up a phone. County records say that land isn't HOA property anymore. It was sold a month ago. Heads turned, murmurs rose, Eleanor blinked. That's incorrect. We had an agreement in place. I stepped forward. I bought the land. Legally. Clean title. No lease renewal. I have the deed here. I held up a manila folder, the official stamps visible for anyone who cared to look. The room exploded. Shouts, gasps. A woman in the front row turned to her husband and said, "So we've been locked out of the lake for nothing?" A board member leaned over to Eleanor, clearly whispering. "Did you know?" Eleanor stood up. "Everyone calm down. This is being blown out of proportion." Another shout. "You lied to us." That's when it happened. A woman in her 60s stood up, someone I'd only seen from afar, and said, clear as a bell, "I make a motion to remove Eleanor from her position as vice president of the board." Gasps, then applause. Eleanor went red. "You can't do that. This isn't how it works." But someone had already pulled out the bylaws. "Actually, we can emergency vote with cause if quorum is present." Hands shot up. People stood. One by one, a tally was taken. Public, loud, unforgiving. The final count, 43 in favor of removal, 2 against, 6 abstained. Eleanor stood frozen, blinking like someone had just pulled the rug out from under her entire life. "You've been voted out," someone said. "Step down." She grabbed her purse and stormed out without another word. The rest of the board looked like they'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. When the room finally quieted down, the new acting president, a nervous but sincere guy named Carl, approached me during the break. "We messed up," he said quietly. "Big time. We didn't know how far she was going. We should have asked questions." I gave him a look. "You still built a fence on land you didn't own." He nodded, shame-faced. "We want to fix it. What would it take?" I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I just laid it out. 3 things, I said. First, a written apology to the neighborhood explaining everything. No spin. Full transparency. Second, you pay for the removal of the fence, clean up the damage. Third, you formally agree to restore open lake access, publicly and permanently. Carl nodded. Done. Put it in writing. 3 days later, every mailbox got a letter stamped with the HOA logo. Inside, a full admission of fault signed by the remaining board members, an apology for the unauthorized fence, an explanation of the land transfer, a promise to never gate off the lake again without community vote. By the end of the week, the fence was gone. Hauled away in 2 dusty pickups by a small work crew the HOA had to pay out of their own discretionary fund. It was almost poetic watching those black iron bars come down one by one. The lake was open again, and the people knew why. The fence came down on a breezy Thursday morning, and I watched from the shade of an old oak tree as the iron bars clanked into the back of a trailer. There was no ceremony, no official announcement, just the quiet shuffle of laborers undoing what should never have been done. A few neighbors gathered nearby, some offering nods and waves, others just lingering as if to make sure it was real. By noon, the gate was gone, and just like that, the lake was open again. But this time, things were different. Not because of the land, though yes, technically I still owned the access point, but because everyone now knew that a single homeowner could push back, that the board didn't hold absolute power. That transparency mattered, and silence had a cost. I'd met with the new board once since the vote. Cordial, professional. We shook hands, traded apologies, even laughed a little. Carl had asked if I'd ever considered joining the board. I declined. With a smile. "Let's not push our luck," I said. "I prefer my mornings quiet." Eleanor was gone within a month. Word was she'd taken a new job out of state. Some folks said she left in shame. Others said she never saw it coming. Personally, I didn't care why she left, just that she wouldn't be rattling chains at any more gates around here. The community shifted after that. People started asking questions at meetings. They stopped blindly approving things. I saw more. Families down by the lake on weekends, fishing, skipping rocks, laughing like they used to. Sometimes I'd unlock the gate for them. Other times I'd just leave it open. A few residents brought me cookies. One guy brought beer. One teenager even called me a legend. That one made me chuckle. But I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because the lake had always been more than water and trees. It was where I went to breathe. To think, to reset when the world spun too fast. And now I could sit on my familiar little bench at sunrise, coffee in hand, ducks drifting across the glassy surface, and know that I had protected that peace. Not just for me, but for everyone. The birds chirped. The water lapped gently against the rocks. Somewhere, a kid yelled with excitement as he caught a fish. I reached into my pocket and ran a thumb over the cool brass of the key that now lived there. The only one. A small thing. A quiet power. I smiled and took another sip.